While Silent Hill 2 is not a game revered for its combat, Bloober Team's incredible remake of the legendary PS2 classic has completely modernized the game's action in what for me is 2024's current frontrunner for Game of the Year. Silent Hill 2 Remake's revamped combat not only reshaped the boundaries of survival horror by adding a dodge button, it concurrently strengthened the fear factor of the grotesque monsters that made Silent Hill so famous in the first place, with them now not only providing horrifying visuals and ambiance, but genuinely stressful and complex combat scenarios. Leading me into today's topic of discussion, a grading of Silent Hill 2 Remake's weapons. Unlike our typical ranking approach, this video will not be a numbered list going from worst to best, rather a graded system where I give a letter grade to each individual weapon. In the same model as our Dead Space Remake weapons ranking from last year, the weapons here will be placed on a scale of S to C, with the grades based on a weapon's general utility, effectiveness in both open and closed environment combat, and, of course, enjoyability. Last time out, we had an even lower tier, D for do not use, but I don't think any of Silent Hill's weapons are that bad, especially given the game's natural equipment progression. Also, in contrast to the Dead Space video, I will not be making the mistake of unintentionally spoiling parts of the story, so you won't have to worry about that here. The only spoilers will be the weapons themselves and the areas you find them in. Lastly, I'll be going over each weapon based on the order you unlock them, and I won't be counting the flashlight or hyperspray. As always, thank you to our patrons for continuing to support us, and be sure to check out our Patreon, linked in the description below. So, what should you use in your journey through Silent Hill? Let's find out. Weapon 1, the radio. Though the radio isn't a weapon in the literal definition of the word, I believe it's one of the most vital mechanics in the game. It's fair to question why I counted this, but not the flashlight or hyperspray, so let me quickly explain my reasoning. For one, the hyperspray requires 3 fully completed new game cycles to unlock, so it's not exactly a generally applicable weapon. Although on the point of the flashlight, in practical use, the radio is barely discernible from it. However, I felt that due to this game's innate darkness and the vast amount of ammo and healing items found in exploring said darkness, the flashlight is essentially a prerequisite for beating the game, despite the option to turn it on or off. On the other hand, the radio is a purely combat-centric feature that even has its own achievement, unlocked by not using it for an entire playthrough, an indicator to me as to whether or not the developers think it's a weapon. The radio's use goes as far as playing static that gets increasingly louder the closer in vicinity you get to a monster, and as of the day I'm recording this video, they even added a haptic feature that plays static through the PS5 controller if you don't use headphones. The radio isn't necessary by any means, but what you gain from leaving it on cannot be understated, especially in the early game when a surprise attack from a mannequin could cost you one of your very limited supply of healing drinks and syringes. Because of its extreme efficiency, completely involuntary use, and consistent helpfulness, I give the radio a grade of A. Weapon 2, the wooden plank. After trudging his way through the outskirts of South Vale devoid of weaponry, James rips a board off a window out of desperation when confronted by a lying figure, and it immediately becomes a handy tool for the next few hours. I'm not a diehard fan of immersion, but I do think the damage this does is pretty accurate for a rotten shape with hastily nailed in spikes, intentional or not. Before you unlock the handgun in Woodside Apartments, this is your sole way to fend off the many lying figures found in South Vale. I do think the wooden plank shines much more as an accessory compared to use on its own, with the exception of the crawling lying figures. Even then, I prefer the Dead Space Godstomp animation. Feels more visceral. To that point, I also think the wooden plank is significantly better in an enclosed environment compared to the more spacious South Vale, which may also be a symptom of melee combat inherently. I admittedly felt a bit frustrated by the combat at the beginning, but after around 20 hours of experience and a self-granted black belt in it, I can say with full confidence that it wasn't awkward clunkiness, more the wooden plank's underwhelming damage. On its own, it takes approximately 6 hits to kill a lying figure or mannequin, though when combined with the handgun, it does make for an efficient finisher. Specifically with mannequins, using the wooden plank to knock them down after shooting them in the knees is about as useful as it gets, mostly in saving vital handgun ammo, which is so rare to come by in the early mid-game. I do think there's a satisfying element to it, but truth be told, all the positives of the wooden plank are simply one-upped by its direct upgrade you get only a few hours later. The wooden plank is a great accessory to the handgun, but due to its limited versatility alone, low damage, and the natural danger of using a melee weapon, I give the wooden plank a grade of C. Weapon 3, the handgun. With all the weird stuff that goes on in Silent Hill, cleaners not being able to find a gun sitting in a bright red shopping cart in the center of a room isn't exactly unsurprising. I'm just happy the handgun shows up when it does, because what it adds to the combat is immense. With your first long-range weapon, an entirely new layer of the combat is revealed, becoming significantly more complex as opposed to relying solely on the wooden plank. The handgun is the most consistently useful weapon in the game due to generous ammo drops and good damage, and it can be used right next to monsters or as far away as you'd like. The best aspect of the handgun, to me, which in a way is more so a byproduct of the combat itself, is the ability to stagger enemies by shooting them in the knees, setting them up for melee finishers. It's a really inventive way to preserve your ammo stockpile, especially in Woodside and Blue Creek before other guns are available, and handgun ammo is slightly rarer to find. I think Silent Hill 2's handgun and Dead Space's plasma cutter are surprisingly comparable, the only difference being that Dead Space's weapon upgrade system gives you the option to make the plasma cutter the most powerful weapon in your arsenal. The handgun is and remains as you first found it in that beautiful amaranth red shopping cart throughout your whole journey, but my point is that both the plasma cutter and handgun are essentially perfect in what they set out to be. They deal apt damage, can be used to conserve ammo for the larger, more powerful weapons, and work really well in combination with melee. Unlike the other guns, which like I said have less frequent ammo spawns and as such are much less viable to use all the time, the handgun is useful in every situation, from mannequins on the ceiling in Toluca Prison to a bubblehead nurse in Brookhaven Hospital. Due to its consistency in every given scenario, reliable ammo supply, and great damage, I give the handgun a grade of A. Weapon 4, the steel pipe. Just after sacrificing the wooden plank to stop a conga line of lying figures, James rips out a pipe from a broken down car, and what a stroke of luck that turns out to be. Like I referenced in the wooden plank segment, the same positives and pitfalls of the plank are equally applicable to the steel pipe. It's much better alone in close range than in an open environment, and is best paired with the handgun. I do also think it's slightly more satisfying than the plank, but that's a very minor point. The biggest upgrade with the steel pipe is actually its damage, despite it not being good enough to be viable on its own. Compared to the wooden plank's 6 hits per enemy, the steel pipe only takes 4, and most notably, only 3 stomp attacks to kill the crawling mannequins and mandarins, who I'd say are the most difficult of the base enemies despite the latter's infrequent appearances. Because it's a direct upgrade on the wooden plank, but is still very restricted by its existence as a melee weapon, I give the steel pipe a grade of B. Weapon 5, the shotgun. Due to the relative groundedness of Silent Hill 2, using the shotgun feels like using the BFG 9000. My perspective is a bit warped by games like Doom, where shotguns aren't necessarily blasts of pure energy more than they are sawed-off slaughter machines, so using a genuinely powerful shotgun was like molting out of my skin and feeling for the first time. The shotgun is incredibly satisfying, and even more notably, ammo efficient, blowing anything in your path to smithereens with a single shot, even the likes of bubblehead nurses who comparatively take anywhere from 4 to 7 handgun bullets, or around 10 whacks with a steel pipe. It's as useful as the chainsaw in pure damage, but is only hindered by a fairly limited ammo supply that forces you to be conservative with use. It's not as bad as, say, Resident Evil 2, where you have to outright avoid some enemies to make it with enough ammo to survive, but if you go around blasting every mannequin and lying figure in sight, you'll be scrounging for health drinks after scraping by a nurse with just a steel pipe. Due to its sheer power, the incomparable satisfaction that comes with said power, and excellent ammo efficiency, I give the shotgun a grade of S. Weapon 6, the hunting rifle. Silent Hill 2's final weapon is found in Toluca Prison, and I think it's great. The hunting rifle has incredibly high damage and, like any sniper, works best when standing still. The problem is that practically every combat room from Toluca Prison onwards is close range environmentally engaging, and usually features the fastest enemies in the game, the crawling mannequins. Essentially, the opposite scenario for what you'd like to use a hunting rifle in. It's still exceptionally good due to its heavy damage and serving as a viable backup to the shotgun so as to not overuse ammo, but it suffers immensely from not being obtainable before a South Vale type environment. I frankly don't have many non-boss fight examples where I use the hunting rifle because it's just not applicable. I also find it a little underwhelming that it doesn't one-shot bubblehead nurses. Still, the hunting rifle is extremely efficient in killing lesser enemies, great with staggering bosses, and, of course, is satisfying as any when landing a clean shot. For the reasons listed, I give the hunting rifle a grade of A. Weapon 7, the chainsaw. That should sum it up pretty well. The chainsaw is easily Silent Hill 2's most epic and iconic weapon left, and its legendary status carries on 25 years after its debut in original Silent Hill. I'm a huge fan of the survival horror genre's unlockable weapon trope, and due to the chainsaw's accessibility compared to the achievement and hardcore S+ run locked secret weapons of the Resident Evil and Dead Space series, I appreciate it greatly. The chainsaw one-shots base enemies, and while I won't get into specifics, it also does incredibly good damage against bosses, despite the more vulnerable nature of melee combat. It's the best weapon in the game, and it should be. I give the chainsaw a grade of S+. For a final rerun of the ranking, in the S+ tier we have the chainsaw, in S, the shotgun, in A, the hunting rifle, handgun, and radio, in B, the steel pipe, and in C, the wooden plank. And now the question well, not me, you guys. The question you've all probably not been waiting for, but I'm gonna answer it anyways. What weapons did I use? Thanks for asking. I personally thought the handgun was the most efficient, but my personal favorite, excluding the chainsaw, was the shotgun. Because the weapon arsenal is fairly limited, you can't really go wrong, but I do wish the hunting rifle could have been found before an open world area, or had a dedicated segment to it outside of bosses, as its use gets limited by the endgame's generally claustrophobic environments. Which weapon was your favorite, and which did you use the most in your playthroughs? Be sure to comment down below, and stay on the lookout for more Silent Hill 2 content coming out shortly. With all that said, deuces.